Welcome to Tech Bytes and News, your daily roundup of articles featured in Hacker News. Today, we're diving deep into Zig's writer system. It's a bit layered, shall we say.
Layered is an understatement. I was completely lost trying to understand the three different types of writers in Zig. Any type, any writer, and generic writer. It's a bit of a head-scratcher.
Exactly. Let's start with writer, any type. It's the simplest, appearing most often in std.fmt. Think of it as a template. The compiler generates a specific version for each writer type used. Zero runtime overhead, but it can bloat binaries and slow compilations, especially with many writer types.
So it's efficient for a few types, but scales poorly? And the documentation a black hole you mentioned?
Precisely. It relies on conventions. You need to check the source code to see which methods write, write-all, write-byte, etc. are actually called. It's not explicitly defined. It's a bit implicit.
Right. And the biggest limitation? It can only be a function parameter. You can't use it in a struct field. That's where std.io.anywriter comes in, right? It's Zig's closest thing to a writer interface.
Yes. Anywriter is a more structured approach. It's an interface with a write fn and a context. It even implements write-all and write-byte in times based on the write function. But there's a catch. Performance issues can arise because there's no way for an implementation to provide optimized versions of those helper functions.
I see. So it's more structured but potentially less efficient. And then there's std.io generic writer, which I found particularly confusing. It seems to be the actual type returned by file.writer or array_list.writer.
That's the core of the confusion. Generic writer is generic, taking a context and an error type as parameters. This allows for type-safe error handling, unlike anywriter, which uses any error, a project-wide error set. This is crucial for reliability, especially in critical systems.
So, generic writer is more type-safe but less flexible because it's not an interface in the traditional sense? It's a generic type, so a generic writer for a file is a different type than a generic writer for an array list.
Exactly. It's not interchangeable like an interface. But for everyday use, you'll usually pass the result of writer to a writer, any type function parameter. It mostly works, but it can be frustrating to figure out the exact requirements for the writer.
So it's a trade-off. Any type is simple but limited and potentially inefficient. Any writer is more structured but can have performance problems. And generic writer is type-safe but not as flexible. It's a complex system.
Indeed. The design aims to balance code bloat and type safety. Generic writer reuses any writer's logic, minimizing code duplication. The @errorcast function handles error type conversion. But, as the article points out, there are ongoing efforts to improve performance and documentation.
It's a fascinating design, even if it's a bit convoluted. Thanks for breaking it down.
My pleasure. And that's all the time we have for today's Tech Bytes and News. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.